I've been sitting on this bench for over 40 years. I've seen wealth, I've seen poverty, seen everything in between. But some days test every ounce of patience you think you have. That Wednesday morning in March was one of those days. Cold, gray morning, the kind that matches your mood when you know you're about to deal with something that's going to stick with you for a long time. Mayor Patricia Hendricks' daughter was on my docket. Stephanie Hendricks, 23 years old, trust fund kid with a brand new BMW and apparently zero understanding of how the world actually works for most people. She'd accumulated 17 parking violations in 6 months. 17. Not because she couldn't afford the meters, because she figured rules were for other people. Now, parking tickets might seem small, but here's what bothers me about cases like this. When you've got money, when your dad runs the city, when you've never had to choose between groceries and gas money, those little violations become symbols of something bigger. They become statements about who matters and who doesn't. I arrived at court early that morning, old habit from my father. Frankie used to say, adjusting his work boots before heading to the construction site, respect the job respects you. So there I was at 8:15, going through the docket with Christina's coffee. Strong stuff, the Italian way. The first case up was Maria Gonzalez, single mother, worked 2 jobs, night shift at the hospital, mornings cleaning offices. Had gotten a parking ticket outside the school where she was picking up her 8-year-old daughter. Meter had run out while she was inside dealing with her kid's asthma attack. Mrs. Gonzalez stood at my bench, nervous as could be, hands shaking, voice barely above a whisper. Your Honor, she said, I know I parked wrong, but Isabella couldn't breathe, and I had to get her inhaler from the nurse, and that's when she started crying. Not dramatic crying, not trying to get sympathy, just the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who's been carrying too much for too long. Working 2 jobs, raising a kid alone, probably hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. Behind her in the gallery, I heard this snickering, this muffled laughing. I looked up, and there was Stephanie Hendricks with her designer handbag and perfect manicure, literally covering her mouth, trying not to laugh out loud at this woman's tears. My blood pressure started climbing. You want to know why? Because I've been that kid who watches his mother struggle. When I was 8 years old, my mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table after Dad got hurt at the construction site. I watched her count pennies at the grocery store, watched her darn holes in our socks because new ones weren't in the budget. And the idea that someone would laugh at that kind of pain, it made me sick. Mrs. Gonzalez, I said gently, keeping my voice calm for her sake, tell me about your daughter's condition. Asthma, Your Honor. Sometimes the attacks come sudden, and if I don't get her the inhaler quick. She wiped her eyes with a tissue that looked like it had already been used a few times. More snickering from the back. This time, Stephanie whispered something to her friend sitting next to her, some girl with equally expensive clothes and equally empty expression. Both of them found Mrs. Gonzalez's situation hilarious. I set down my gavel, not hard, just firm enough to get everyone's attention. Mrs. Gonzalez, I want you to know that caring for your child's health emergency makes you a hero, not a criminal. Ticket dismissed. You take care of that little girl. The relief on that woman's face, it reminded me why I love this job. She practically floated out of the courtroom, probably thinking about how that $25 fine wouldn't have to come out of this week's grocery money. Next case, Christina called. Stephanie Hendricks, 17 counts of parking violations. Up walked Miss Hendricks like she was on a catwalk. Designer jeans that probably cost more than Mrs. Gonzalez makes in a week. Boots that definitely cost more. Carrying a purse that could have fed a family for a month. No lawyer. Didn't think she needed one. Why would she? Daddy runs the city. She didn't even wait for me to speak, just stood there with this smirk and said, "Judge, let's just get this over with. I've got a lunch appointment at the country club." Lunch appointment at the country club, while a working mother just stood in this same spot crying over a $25 ticket. "Miss Hendricks," I said, looking straight at her, "do you understand why you're here?" "Obviously," she replied, examining her nails like she was bored. "Some parking tickets. Look, I'll pay whatever fine you want, and we can all move on with our lives." Pay whatever fine I wanted, like justice was just another bill her trust fund could cover. "These aren't just some parking tickets," I told her. 17 violations in 6 months. Handicap spaces, fire lanes, loading zones. Do you understand what these spaces are for? She shrugged. Actually shrugged. "I mean, I was just running quick errands. It's not like anyone was using those spots when I parked there." Not like anyone was using them. Handicap spaces, fire lanes. "Miss Hendricks," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Handicap spaces aren't empty spaces waiting for your convenience. They're lifelines for people who need them." "Whatever," she said, then turned to her friend in the gallery. "Sarah, did you see Jessica's Instagram from the Hamptons? That yacht is insane." She was having a conversation with her friend while I was trying to explain why parking laws exist. In my courtroom. While discussing 17 violations that showed complete disregard for public safety. "Miss Hendricks," I said, raising my voice slightly to get her attention back, "you need to focus on this proceeding." She turned back to me with this expression of pure annoyance. "Sorry, Judge. Look, can we speed this up? Like I said, I've got plans." That's when something inside me snapped. Not the yelling, losing control kind of snap. The cold, calculated, this ends now kind of snap that comes from 40 years of watching entitled people treat the law like their personal suggestion box. "Miss Hendricks," I said, standing up from my bench, "I want you to help me understand something. A few minutes ago, you were laughing at Mrs. Gonzalez, a working mother who was crying over a single parking ticket she got while helping her daughter through an asthma attack. What exactly did you find funny about that situation?" Her face went red. Caught. I wasn't laughing at anyone. I saw you. The whole courtroom saw you. So I'll ask again. What was funny about watching a mother struggle? She looked around the courtroom, probably hoping someone would rescue her. But her friend was suddenly very interested in her phone, and everyone else was watching this privileged kid finally get called out. "I don't know," she mumbled. I mean, it was just a parking ticket. She was being dramatic." Dramatic. A mother worried about her child's medical emergency was being dramatic. That's when I knew this wasn't just about parking tickets anymore. This was about teaching someone who'd never faced consequences what real responsibility looks like. "Miss Hendricks," I said, sitting back down and folding my hands, "you think Mrs. Gonzalez was being dramatic about a $25 fine?" "Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's $25. Who cries over $25? Who cries over $25? This girl was so far removed from reality that she couldn't understand how $25 might matter to someone, how it might mean choosing between lunch for the week or paying the fine, how it might represent hours of work at minimum wage. "Let me tell you who cries over $25, I said. Someone who works 2 jobs and still struggles to pay rent. Someone who counts every penny to make sure their kid has food and medicine. Someone who's one emergency away from disaster, and that parking fine might be the emergency that breaks them." She was starting to look uncomfortable, which was good. Maybe there was still some humanity left under all that privilege. But here's what really bothers me, Miss Hendricks. It's not just that you don't understand her situation. It's that you found her pain amusing. You laughed at a mother's tears. That tells me something about your character that 17 parking tickets can't. Look, Judge, she said, and her voice was getting defensive now. I'm sorry if I hurt someone's feelings or whatever, but it's not my fault that lady can't afford stuff. That's just life. That's just life. Like poverty was some kind of natural disaster that just happened to people, instead of something often made worse by people exactly like her. People who park in handicapped spaces because they're just running quick errands. People who block fire lanes because their convenience matters more than emergency access. I thought about my father again, how he taught me that every job matters, every person matters, every rule exists for a reason, how he worked 3 jobs after his injury and never complained, never expected special treatment, never acted like the world owed him anything. Miss Hendricks, I said, you're 23 years old enough to understand that your actions affect other people, old enough to know that rules aren't suggestions, old enough to show respect in a court of law. I am being respectful, she protested. Respectful? You were on your phone while I was explaining your violations. You interrupted me to talk about yachts. You laughed at another defendant's emotional distress. That's your definition of respect? She didn't answer, which was probably the smartest thing she'd done all morning. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. For your 17 parking violations, you owe the city $425 in fines. Fine, she said, reaching for her purse. I'll write a check. I'm not finished. You'll pay the fines, yes, but you'll also complete 40 hours of community service. Her mouth dropped open. Community service? For parking tickets? 40 hours working with families in need. You volunteer at the Children's Hospital where Mrs. Gonzalez works nights. You'll see what it's like to serve people instead of expecting to be served. That's ridiculous, she said, and her voice was getting louder. My father is the mayor of this city. You can't make me do manual labor like some common criminal. Common criminal. There it was, the real problem. In her mind, there were 2 kinds of people. People like her who deserved special treatment, and common criminals who deserved whatever they got. Miss Hendricks, I said, standing up again, your father being mayor doesn't give you immunity from consequences. If anything, it makes your behavior more disappointing. You represent this city every time you break its laws. This is harassment, she snapped. I'm going to call my father, and you can call whoever you want after we're finished here. 40 hours of community service at Providence Children's Hospital. You'll work directly with families dealing with medical emergencies, and you'll write a 500-word essay about what you learned. An essay? What is this, high school? Apparently, someone needs to finish the lessons high school didn't teach you about compassion and responsibility. That's when her friend stood up in the gallery. This is so unfair, she called out. She doesn't deserve this. I looked at this friend, another privileged kid, who probably had no idea what real consequences looked like. Miss, I said, you're welcome to observe, but you will not interrupt these proceedings. But Stephanie was on a roll now. All that entitlement came bubbling over. You know what, she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. This is exactly what's wrong with this city. People like you holding back people like me. 40 years on the bench, and this spoiled kid thought I was the problem. Miss Hendricks, I said, my voice getting colder. People like me work to ensure the law applies equally to everyone. People like you seem to think it shouldn't apply to you at all. That's when she completely lost it. You're just jealous, she screamed. Jealous because we have money and you're stuck in this pathetic little courthouse. The courtroom went dead silent. Christina stopped typing and just stared. This girl had just insulted every person who came through my courtroom. Miss Hendricks, I said, my voice quiet but clear. In 40 years on this bench, I have seen convicted felons accept responsibility with more grace than you've shown for parking violations. Her face went bright red, and I could see tears starting to form. Good. Maybe she was finally understanding that real consequences were coming. Let me tell you what Mrs. Gonzalez has that you don't, I continued. She has dignity in the face of struggle. She has love that motivates her to work 2 jobs for her daughter. Those are treasures your trust fund can't buy. The tears were flowing now, and for the first time since she walked into my courtroom, Stephanie Hendricks looked like the 23-year-old kid she actually was. Your community service starts Monday, I said. You report to Dr. Maria Santos at Providence Children's Hospital at 7 a.m. You work with families navigating medical emergencies. She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. And you will personally apologize to Mrs. Gonzalez for your behavior today. You will find her at the hospital and tell her that you were wrong to mock her concern for her daughter. Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. Court is adjourned. I'll see you back here in 6 weeks. As the courtroom emptied, Stephanie's friend rushed up to her. Steph, that was so unfair. But something had changed in Stephanie's expression. She looked thoughtful, like she was processing something she'd never had to think about before. Sarah, she said quietly, did you see that woman crying? The one with the sick kid? Yeah, why are you asking? I don't know, I never thought about why someone would cry over $25. 6 weeks later, Stephanie returned to my courtroom. She looked different, still well-dressed, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Understanding, maybe? Miss Hendricks, I said, Dr. Santos tells me you've completed your community service requirements. Yes, Your Honor, but I asked if I could continue volunteering even after the 40 hours were finished. That surprised me. Why? Because I met Mrs. Gonzalez at the hospital. She was working her night shift, and I recognized her from court. I apologized to her like you ordered, but she hugged me, Judge. After the way I acted, she hugged me and said she forgave me. Stephanie's voice was getting emotional. Her daughter Isabella is 8 years old, and her asthma medication cost almost $400 a month. $400, Judge. That's more than some people make in a week. She wiped her eyes, genuine tears this time. I realized something that day. When I was laughing at her crying over $25, I had $25 in my pocket that I probably spent on coffee. But for her, $25 mattered. What did you learn from all this, Miss Hendricks? I learned that my problems aren't actually problems. They're inconveniences. And I learned that laughing at someone's pain doesn't make you superior. It makes you small. And what are you going to do with that knowledge? I want to help. Mrs. Gonzalez and I are starting a program to help working parents who can't afford to lose pay when their kids have medical emergencies. This was not the same person who'd stood in my courtroom 6 weeks ago. Miss Hendricks, I said, what changed? Really changed? I met Isabella, she said simply. Mrs. Gonzalez brought her to the hospital one day, and I watched this 8-year-old girl apologize to her mother for being sick. She was worried that needing medicine was causing her mom stress. Her voice cracked. An 8-year-old child was apologizing for having asthma. And I realized that I've never apologized for causing my parents stress, even though I've caused plenty. I thought about how sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving people the opportunity to become who they're meant to be. Miss Hendricks, I said, character isn't built in moments of comfort. It's built in moments of challenge. Yes, Your Honor, I won't forget that. As she turned to leave, she stopped and looked back. Judge Caprio, thank you for not letting me stay who I was. That afternoon, I got a letter delivered to my chambers. It was from Mrs. Gonzalez, written in careful English. Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted to thank you for what you did for Stephanie. I know she was disrespectful in your courtroom, but she has become like family to Isabella and me. She comes to see us twice a week, helps Isabella with homework, and yesterday she took us grocery shopping because she wanted to learn about budgeting. She is a good girl who just needed to learn about real life. Thank you for teaching her instead of just punishing her. Some people need to see kindness before they can show it. Maria Gonzalez. You know what my father taught me about justice? Frank, he'd say in his thick Italian accent, justice isn't about making people pay. It's about making them grow. Stephanie Hendricks could have paid her fines and walked away unchanged. She could have had her father make some calls and gotten out of the whole thing. But instead, she learned what it means to see other people as fully human, deserving of respect regardless of their bank account. That's what real pain taught her, not the manufactured drama of having to wait in line or pay parking tickets, but the real pain of watching a mother choose between medicine and food, of seeing a child apologize for being sick, of understanding that privilege comes with responsibility. I still see Stephanie around Providence sometimes. She's in graduate school now, studying social work. Last I heard, her emergency parent fund had helped over 200 families. And Mrs. Gonzalez? She's the program coordinator. Sometimes real pain opens your eyes to real purpose. Sometimes a parking ticket becomes a pathway to becoming a better human being. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice looks less like punishment and more like transformation. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, the best judgment isn't always in the book. Sometimes it's in giving people the chance to write a better chapter of their own story. Thanks for listening, and God bless.